If you can just have it your the Zoom in speaker view, so when you're presenting, it's in the speaker view, so we can actually see you when you're talking. So we're here at the Black Girl Magic panel, policy considerations and evaluations of Black women leaders. And today we have Dr. Natasha McNeely, who is going to be presenting a paper titled, "What's That Got to Do with It? Evaluating Mayor Bowers' Attempts to Reduce Black Maternal Mortality in Washington, D.C." And then, of course, we have Sydney Carr. She's a PhD candidate, Department of Political Science at the Ford School of Public Policy, University of Michigan. We will start with Dr. McNeely and then Sydney's paper. So without further ado, I will then invite Dr. McNeely to actually share her screen, have it in speaker view so we get to see you as well. So welcome.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to present my research to you all today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that my paper is slightly different than what I had proposed. And honestly, I would very much appreciate feedback regarding the framing. But here we go. Again, thank you for the opportunity. Okay. So there were several impetus for my interest in Black maternal mortality, and I've included the pictures of 3 women who were the inspiration, so to speak. So back in 2017, I actually happened to be pregnant with my second child, and that was around the time I started seeing coverage related to this issue. As you can recognize from the photos, the top left photo is world tennis champion Serena Williams. Around 2017, I believe around October, she had participated in an interview with Vogue magazine, which detailed the birth of her child, Olympia, but she also provided details regarding her birth experience. And as some of you may recall, she actually had a smooth birth, but she encountered some very serious postpartum or post-birth complications, including a pulmonary embolism, and that she unfortunately was not, she had a lot of difficulty getting the medical staff to take seriously until it was almost too late. Next to her photo is the late Crystal Galloway. She was the mother of, I believe, about 4 children in Florida. She actually died because the medical professionals who were sent to her home to help her out after she encountered complications postpartum actually delayed helping her because they didn't know if she could pay. The bottom photo is the late Dr. Shalon Irving, who was an epidemiologist at the CDC, and she actually studied racial and health disparities. She actually passed away postpartum after she encountered complications related to high blood pressure. So, there's my teaspoon come out. Oh, yes, in a bit, Mama. Remember, Mommy's in her presentation. Sorry about that. But just some quick statistics. The highest rate of maternal death occurs among Black women across all levels of income and socioeconomic status compared to all other races. The Center for Disease Control, or CDC, finds that Black mothers in the US die at 3 to 4 times the rate of white mothers, which is one of the widest of all racial disparities in women's health. We see that it is further noted that Black women are 243% more likely than white women to die from pregnancy or childbirth related causes, producing, again, one of the largest racial and health disparities. You're welcome. And as you guys will see that there's just some more statistics. I'll just briefly highlight one of them. So there are higher rates of pregnancy-related complications compared to non-Hispanic white women among Black women. And just again, to give you guys an idea, according to the CDC, we see that 40.0 deaths per 100,000 live births for Black women compared to 12.4 deaths per 100,000 live births for white women. Some factors that I'll briefly highlight that have been found in the public health literature that contribute towards Black maternal mortality include the following: the delaying the initiation of prenatal care, sometimes for the reasons including unplanned pregnancies, but also the lack of access to care. Another contributing factor includes the impact of racial discrimination in healthcare. And finally, the unfavorable birth outcomes, including the ones that I highlighted among with the examples of Dr. Shalon Irving, Crystal Galloway, and Serena Williams. We see that there's also the concept of infant mortality, and we see that the CDC finds that infants born to Black mothers are dying at twice the rate of infants born to non-Hispanic white mothers. Another unfavorable birth outcome includes low birth rate infants. And then there are, again, postpartum complications. So after the births of their infants, Black women are more likely to encounter complications, including the onset of postpartum depression, readmission after C-sections. I'll skip to the bottom, and they're more likely to suffer from the lack of understanding of the biological risks they encounter on the part of non-Black medical professionals. Okay, so given this context, as I continue to research this, the concept of Black maternal mortality at this stage, I am very interested in the actions of Black female leaders. And as you all are aware, in this case, the mayor of Washington, D.C., Mayor Muriel Bowser. And so that leads to these two research questions. So during Mayor Bowser's tenure in office, what actions has she taken in order to address Black maternal mortality and infant mortality in Washington, D.C.? And then next, how effective have these actions been? Specifically, have they helped reduce the rate of Black maternal mortality since she entered office in 2015? Now, why Washington, D.C.? As I briefly mentioned, Mayor Muriel Bowser is an African-American female, and during the course of her first term in office, she actually became a mom herself after she adopted a baby girl in 2018. But aside from that, Washington, D.C. is a very interesting case to examine the concept of Black maternal mortality because of the following statistics. So first, at 36.1 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births, Washington's maternal mortality ratio is almost twice the national average. And those were statistics from 2018. But we see that by 2019, that rate actually increased to 59.7 deaths per 100,000 live births. And then lastly, in Washington, D.C., 57% of infant births occur during the first 7 days of deaths, occur within the first 7 days of the child's life. The city's infant mortality rate is 7.3 for every 1,000 live births, above the national average. Mayor Bowser herself entered office as mayor she was elected in 2014, and she began her term in 2015. However, she served on the city council from approximately 2007 until she decided to run for mayoral office in 2014. Now, over the course of my examination, I've actually looked at a lot of data, which I will be more than happy to talk about in Q&A. But I've looked at a lot of her budget policy proposals, and I divided them into these 2 time periods. So from 2014 through 2017, her policy foci in the forms of the budget proposals included crime, education, health very broadly, renewable energy, affordable housing, etc. And then as you can see, from June 2017 until I stopped my examination, which was November 2020, a lot of those issues carried over. But we see that there was a distinctively more direct focus on perinatal health, including the health of mothers and the outcomes of the births of their children. So we see that over the course of her term, so again, she entered office in 2015 after she was elected in 2014. When she first entered office in 2015, her budget proposals included funding for the DC Healthy Start program, which broadly focused on the health of mothers and their child. So and aimed to provide resources that would improve the lives of mothers in general. But we see by 2017, there is more of a direct focus on the concept of maternal mortality. So by that time, we see that by 2017, she was actually pursuing more directly related legislation and program creation related to issues that, as I mentioned earlier, have been shown to contribute towards maternal mortality in general, but also Black maternal mortality specifically. So by 2017, she in a coalition, as part of a coalition with Dr. Nesbitt, who she appointed as the head of the DC Department of Health, they created the Thrive by 5 program in DC. There is also the Healthy Start program, as well as the One Key Question strategy and the maternal and the creation. So she pursued some legislation as part of a different coalition with US mayors, including Mayor de Blasio of New York City and other Black female mayors throughout the United States, in efforts to create what are called maternal mortality review committees, which, as the name implies, essentially examine birth-related deaths and the factors that contributed to them. By the time we get into 2018, not only do we see that there's more funding requested on the part of Mayor Bowser for various programs, but we also see more legislation and more program creation that on paper were aimed to reduce maternal mortality. So I'll highlight a few for the sake of time. We see that 2018, so September 2018, during Maternal Health Week, which began September 9th through 15th, 2018, during that time period was the inaugural National Maternal and Infant Health Summit. And there have been 2 more subsequent ones in 2019 and 2020. We saw that she started the initiative of Maternal Mondays on Facebook. So she would get on Facebook Live on her account, and she would speak to other health professionals and offer tips about how to improve maternal health. We also saw some key pieces of legislation. So for example, the Better Access for Babies to Integrated Equitable Services Act of 2018, or the Babies Act, which was aimed at enforcing strategies that would reduce the rate of preterm births in the district. By 2019, we saw some other actions, including the Commission on Healthcare Systems Transformation, which she created, which released recommendations for improving healthcare concerns, including access to adequate healthcare, and as well as including access to behavioral and acute care. We saw that she, with the support of the DC Council, had a diaper tax holiday. She also announced the recipients of grants totaling more than $2 million in support of organizations who were attempting to improve maternal and infant health. So at this point, by the time of my study, by the time I was ending my downloading of data, if you will, I started to evaluate, is it effective or not? With the data that I had access to, including the report from the DC Department of Health, we see the following. So maternal mortality between the period of 2012 through 2016 increased to the highest amount in 2013, but began to decrease in 2016. So that it began to in 2015, excuse me. And so we saw that there was a slight decrease while she was in office. In the year 3 transition plan accountability report, which was released by her office, in the context of infant mortality rate, we saw that the trend was starting to go down. However, by the time we got to 2019, we actually saw that the rate of maternal mortality in the district was 35.9 per 100,000 live births, which remained higher than the national average. We saw that the rate of mortality among Black women was 71 deaths per 100,000 live births, which again remained higher than the national average, which was at that time 63.8. If you recall at the beginning of the presentation, or a few minutes ago, I should say, when I was talking about YDC, I said in 2019, another source said that it was 59 deaths per 100,000 births. So it's actually increasing as Mayor Bowser continues to be in office. She's actually in her second term. And we do unfortunately see that the infant mortality rate in DC continues to actually trend upward as well. So it's actually much like the Black maternal mortality rate, the infant mortality rate among Black infants continues to be higher than the national average. So at this time, some of my conclusions are the following. That actions taken by Mayor Bowser and her administration included the creation of programs, various pieces of legislation. We see that 2 years into her first term, so again, she began in 2015, but by 2017, she started taking more direct action related to this issue. We see that her commitment to addressing these factors that contribute towards maternal mortality is visible when examining her proposed budgets for each fiscal year beginning in fiscal year 18. But we also see that the efforts by her administration, although they've helped to reduce maternal mortality in the district briefly, the rate of Black maternal mortality as well as the infant mortality rates remains high compared to the rest of the United States. And so, as I said before, if anyone's interested in Q&A, I can talk about the data that I used to get to this point in my research, as well as various national and various national state political solutions that have been proposed and enacted to address Black maternal mortality across the country, as well as non-political solutions. At this time, for the sake of time, I will conclude. But again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. McNeely. I am sure we're going to have a lot of questions during Q&A. So on that note, I'd like to call on Ms. Carr, Sydney Carr. The title of her paper is The Right to Bear Arms, BARE, News Coverage of Michelle Obama. So if you have any questions before you forget, you may write it down in the chat box. So just in case you don't remember later. So Sydney?
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Here. Can you all see my screen or the notes? You can see the presentation, not the notes? Okay, awesome. So this is the project that I will be talking with you all about today. So the Right to Bear Arms news coverage of Michelle Obama. So just to go over a little bit of overview of what I'll be doing, just kind of talking about the background of the project and sort of grounding this work in political communication as well as RAP literature. thinking about the data and methods, going through some of my hypotheses here, some findings, discussion, conclusion, and future direction. And so you all probably may have remembered when Michelle Obama first came into office back in 2009, there was this huge uproar over her first official photo that she took as First Lady, right? And so we can see the photo here. There's a lot of controversy, not over sort of her policy views, right, or something really substantive, but over the fact that she made the choice to wear her bare arms in the photo. And this, of course, was a huge uproar because it was apparently unlike something that first ladies of the past had done, right? And people were saying that Michelle Obama didn't look or act like a first lady. And so we all in this space might have some intuition as to why they would say this about the first Black woman, first lady of the United States. And so in this project, I'm examining news coverage surrounding Michelle Obama primarily between 2013 and 2018. And so I look at television news transcripts. For the purpose of this project, I'm only interested in television news media on major political networks. And so the goal here is to understand the extent to which the tone that major news networks such as Fox and MSNBC in this particular case discuss Michelle Obama as opposed to Melania Trump. And I'll just say right now, I understand that it's like comparing apples to oranges, right? Michelle Obama versus Melania Trump. Melania Trump is obviously a Republican. And so there's huge dissimilarities there. But for the reason that Melania Trump immediately follows Michelle Obama as First Lady is why I choose Melania Trump as my comparative analysis in this instance. And so the premise of the study is to understand the tone that partisan network specifically, right? Because we know that Fox is a very sort of right-leaning network. We know that MSNBC is a very left-leaning network. Discuss Michelle Obama and understanding and rooting this within, negative stereotypes and negative tropes that have been used to characterize Black womanhood in the U.S. for centuries, right? So we think about the Jezebel, we think about the Mammy, right? We think about the Sapphire and how those tropes sort of not only impact public political discourse and news networks, but also potentially impact public opinion, American public opinion surrounding Michelle Obama. And so I'm really interested in her intersectional identity as a Black woman and how that potentially contributes towards the tone and sort of harsh criticism that she receives on these major news networks. As opposed to Melania Trump. And so this is basically to say that Michelle Obama and other prominent Black female political leads, such as Kamala Harris, such as Maxine Waters, such as Stacey Abrams, face a heightened level of negative coverage that is rooted in this historical racism and misogyny. And so looking at a little bit of the literature, Staples and Jones back in 1985 tells us that the ways in which Black women are portrayed in television media continue to reinforce ideas of white superiority and Black inferiority, right? And we see this time and time again. This dates back to the days of minstrel shows, right? But we might say that we see this now, even still, right? We think about movies like The Help, right? And that sort of recurring trope of the Mammy, right? And how this is often coming about even in modern day television. We're thinking about reality TV shows, right? We're thinking about how producers sort of frame Black women in such a way that, might relate to what we call the Sapphire trope, right? This sort of aggressive, verbally aggressive, loud demeanor. And so women of color often face greater and harsher criticism within news media when compared to their non-POC female counterparts. And Sarah Gershon did a study in 2012. And lastly, media portrayals of Black women are often reflective of a devalued understanding that is based upon these historical tropes and racialized assumptions about the Black community as a whole. So just to talk a little bit about what I did, this sort of study that I'm presenting today is a part of a larger sort of dissertation project. But for the time being, I'm solely focusing on content analysis surrounding Michelle Obama television news transcripts and a little in analysis of the ANES data. And so what I did is I randomly extracted 400 television news transcripts between 2013 and 2018 across Fox and MSNBC. And so 200 segments are randomly selected for Michelle Obama, 200 segments are randomly selected for Melania Trump. The process is that I examine occurrences surrounding Melania space Trump and Michelle space Obama to get these segments. And each segment is about 300 words. I use a sentiment scale, original sentiment scale, basically just ranges from -5 to 5, where a segment either gets a -5, which is very negative, or can get a 5, very positive. It can get a 3, slightly positive, 0 is neutral, or -3, slightly negative. So second study, I just analyzed some ANES data from the 2012 pre-election time series, because the thought here is to understand the extent to which watching television news networks impact feeling scores for Michelle Obama. And for this, in this instance, I use Ann Romney, spouse of Mitt Romney, as the comparative analysis. And so I look at regular attention to the Today Show, regular attention to Fox News, and I also, of course, Party ID. I just did an OLS regression here. So my main hypotheses are that one, when compared to Melania Trump, Michelle Obama will face higher levels of negative coverage and lower levels of positive coverage across both Fox and MSNBC combined. And the second one is that ANES 2012 respondents who identify as Republican and also those who watch Fox News frequently will have low feeling scores for Michelle Obama. And the key expectations here, and so I'll also point out the second hypothesis, it could be like, well, no brainer, right? Because Michelle Obama is a Democrat. Of course, Fox, wouldn't be nice, kind to her. But the expectation here is that the sort of, I guess, the ways in which feeling scores will be impacted for, let's say, Ann Romney in terms of MSNBC will work differently than it would for Michelle Obama and Fox. And so I expect that Fox will be harsher on Obama overall than MSNBC is on Trump with the segment analysis, the content analysis. And I also expect that Fox News viewers will have low feeling ratings for Michelle Obama. And I don't expect this to work in the same way for Ann Romney in the Today Show. So just pointing to some of little bit of my findings here. So I will also point out that almost all segments got a rating of 0. This is because they didn't, display any definitive emotion, either positive or negative. That was fine. That's to be expected. But I'm mainly interested in the segments that do express some sort of emotion here. And so you can see for MSNBC, Melania Trump gets 26 total, so 26 out of the 200 that I looked at for Melania Trump, slightly negative. For Michelle Obama on Fox, she gets 18 slightly negative segments. She gets 12 very negative segments. So you can see like Michelle Obama has a slightly higher number of like very negative segments. So even on MSNBC, Melania Trump gets 2 very negative. This was like, saying something like, she is very angry, very much degrading her, her character, right? But you can see that Michelle Obama gets a decently larger number of very negative -5 segments. Whereas even for MSNBC, Melania Trump, she does get slightly negative, but not so much as it to, very negative. Say this is definitively sort of degrading, right? Or talking harshly about her character, right? In the way that we see for Michelle Obama and Fox. And of course, Melania Trump gets a lot of nice segments on Fox, to be expected, and things like that. These histograms are a little bit better visually in terms of understanding this sentiment data. So of course, the highest bar is always going to be 0 because that's the neutral, right? But we're looking at tone of Michelle Obama segments on Fox News. The second highest bar is -5. So after a 0, Michelle Obama gets a, very negative segments. And then for, let's see, Melania Trump on MSNBC News, Melania Trump gets a, decently high number of -3, slightly negative, but a very low number of -5. And so you can see that sort of visualized in these graphs here. So just to go over some of my findings for the regression for study 2, looking at the ANES 2012 data. So attention to Fox News does significantly decrease the rate at which people have high feeling scores for Michelle Obama. So attention to Fox News is associated with very low scores for Michelle Obama. And the feeling thermometer was just 0 to 100. ANES started asking a series of questions about, can you rate political figures on a 0 to 100 scale, right? So we see that attention to Fox News significantly decreases, having high feeling scores, but attention to the Today Show seems to, say that people who frequently watch the Today Show are more likely to have positive scores for Michelle Obama, and of course, Party ID, right? Seems to be very sort of descriptive here of having low scores for Michelle Obama in this case for Republicans. So just talking about some of the language used in these segments. So thinking about what received a -5, what received a -3, right? So one segment said, and this was from Fox, "Why is she so angry? Listen, I see this as propaganda. Instead of promoting how America is an exceptional country, she took that route to play the race card and race bait." This segment got a -5 for obvious reasons here, but also because it sort of directly used like a stereotype word, thinking about like the sapphire shirt, like, why is she so angry? So a -3 for Melania Trump looked like, Melania Trump wants to focus on cyberbullying, even though her husband is known for weaponizing Twitter, bashing at least 282 different people, places, and things in the last 18 months. And so this got a -3 because of course, it's like a negative segment, right? But also it doesn't seem to be sort of a direct attack on Melania Trump's character. And so I'm seeing this come across in segments and doing more content analysis, looking at Black women political figures more broadly, right? That the segments sort of surrounding Black women political figures that get coded as negative seem to be more sort of, degrading or, digs or attacks on their character. Versus talking about, well, I didn't like this, policy stance, right? So you can see a little bit of the difference here with, the Melania Trump segment. So overall, about 17% of Melania Trump segments are in the positive range. Michelle Obama receives 12%. Michelle Obama does receive a slightly higher number of negative sentiment segments and lower number of positive segments. And only a small fraction for Michelle Obama are coded in the positive range received a rating of very positive. This is the key distinction I don't think I talked about in the previous slide. So like a very positive is a +5. This is like they were praising Michelle Obama, right? Didn't see too much of that, which is interesting, even on MSNBC. And so if Michelle Obama is going to get a positive rating, usually it's in the range of only slightly positive. In terms of the second study where I'm looking at the ANES data, respondents who indicate that they watch Fox News frequently do have lower scores for Michelle Obama than those who don't. Respondents who indicate that they watch the Today Show also have higher scores for Michelle Obama. And attentiveness, I didn't show this table, but for Ann Romney, attentiveness to the Today Show did not negatively impact feeling score for Romney in the same way that attentiveness to the Fox show impacted scores for Michelle Obama. So just to conclude, to kind of wrap up here and talk about my future direction, of course, few studies within political communication literature focus on discourse surrounding Black women political elites specifically. And so, I hope to be able to fill in those gaps with my work. The major limitations here, obviously, like I addressed at the beginning, party, ID, and race are not both held constant. This will be addressed in future iterations of the project. Fox and MSNBC are also partisan networks, right? And so ongoing work is inclusive of sort of broader network analysis like CBS, like NBC, like ABC. For this project, I did coding myself, but 3 undergraduate coders at the University of Michigan have been introduced to the project for this sort of longer, broader scale content analysis to achieve intercoder reliability. There's a small segment, there's a small N here, right? But ongoing work, sort of ramps that up. And so the So the future of this project is to do a broader content analysis of transcripts examining leaders like Kamala Harris, Maxine Waters, Stacey Abrams, and also surveys, right? And so the ultimate goal is to sort of understand, the extent to which watching news, right, has significant implications for how the public views Black women political leaders. So thank you, everyone, for listening to my presentation. I'm happy to take questions, and my contact information is here as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. McNeely and Sydney. So we're going to open the floor for questions now. If you have any questions for our panelists, let's just follow protocol. Just raise your hands and I'll call on you to ask questions. So questions, anyone? And of course, Natasha, you can ask Sydney, and Sydney, you can ask Natasha if you have any questions as well. Floor is open. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so Dr. McNeely, so I know you talked a little bit about the direction that you think Dr. Bowers is going to, Mayor Bowers is going to be going. So through your research, what do you think her policy direction is going to be in terms of, because it's still high regardless, the mortality rate for African-American women is actually really high, still high, even though it seems like she was working, or her administration is working on things to lower it. Like, what could be done? Like, what's the policy direction? Like, what do you think? Through your research, what did you find?
So at this time, I guess, so for full disclosure, I had stopped trying to collect data in November of last year. And because I was trying to get the project prepared, start writing up what I had. And so I haven't gone back to see what she's been focusing on since November, but of course there are a lot more. So I guess I'll step back and say the type of data that I was using primarily were press releases released from her office, the Office of the Mayor of DC, press releases, schedule announcements, newsletters. At the beginning of her term, she was releasing newsletters fairly often, budget proposals, state of the district addresses. And then I was also analyzing discussions of actions by the DC legislature. So I actually, for the sake of time, I didn't talk about actions taken by the members of the City Council of DC. And so I think, that being said, for your question, I think from what I gather so far, I honestly think that she and her administration will kind of, I think, continue to pursue like more legislation. One of the things, in the DC case especially, the lack of access of care was exacerbated by the closure of several, there were about 3 labor and delivery units that were closed, and a couple of which were in the 8th ward, which is very poor. It's predominantly minority area. So that really affected the lack of access to adequate care. But over the last several years, she's pursued budget requests, and she's established connections and partnerships with some organizations like Georgetown University, Howard University, that will lead to the eventual construction of 2 more hospitals in the area. So I think that, examples like that, and with the continuous pursuit of like the National Maternal and Infant Health Summit, right, which did bring together a lot of health professionals, local organizations, but also members of the community. At this point, I see the direction of her policies continuing in that trajectory, because there has been some progress in reducing maternal mortality, but it hasn't been a lot, as you rightfully noted. And honestly, I don't know if it's because there hasn't been, like, the time period of examination has been so small, like, right? Because she's only really started focusing on the issue since 2017. And as I said in the presentation, she's in her second term now. So I don't really see any drastic changes. I think she's going to keep pursuing these coalitional partnerships with the Department of Health and other organizations within her administration. We do see that local organizations have partnered up a little bit with her administration as well. So I think she's going to try to keep doing more of the same. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it did. It was actually, I was just curious as to, okay, where is this headed? We need some drastic changes. All right, thank you for that. Sydney, will you be adding other television networks to this study, or are you going to stay with the two? Because I was looking at it, I'm listening to you talk, and I'm like, man, I wonder if the data is going to change, or the perception of negative and positive, is that going to change if we add in more network, or like what's going to happen? I mean, I'm just out of curiosity, have you thought about, like, for a bigger study moving forward, would you add more into that? And then before you answer that, I just wanted to add on to Dr. McNeely's as well. Would you be adding other cities as well? So Sydney, you can go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. For this project, I only looked at Fox and MSNBC, but I have added other coders to the project. And so this is a broader sort of content analysis, looking at like CBS, NBC, and ABC as well, because I also understand that, like, MSNBC and Fox are very partisan. And so I think it is probably better in this case to sort of understand what this might look like from, sort of more moderate or nonpartisan networks. So yes, yeah, absolutely. This is sort of including a broader network analysis.
Okay. And I know you said you're only interested in television analysis, no plans in adding other social media outlets?
Yeah, so I've definitely thought about that, right? I've thought about, like, Twitter, absolutely, in the age of social media. So that's definitely something that I've considered. So I think the reason why I look at television is because it still tends to be a very, a source that which a lot of Americans tend to still get their news from. And so even if, we see clips on social media, right? But ultimately these clips are also, the source is networks that has been televised at some point, but then we'll just see, like, maybe a video on Twitter or something like that. So in that case, I still, the idea is here that, like, television is still, like, the main source of political information for a lot of Americans. But I have thought about like social media and, other platforms like that as well.
Okay. Well, thank you for that as well. I know, Dr. McNeely, your study is just, it's a case study of just one city, but I mean, this is a huge phenomenon. So I don't know if you would be, for generalizability, if you would be interested in adding other cities as well, because it's a huge thing within the Black community.
Yes. I have briefly thought about that. At this point in time, I haven't developed sort of a strategy beyond other cities that have Black female mayor executives. But one thing I'd like to do in the future is also looking at the congressional level, because there have been, and that's not to say that at the state level we haven't seen Black female state legislators not introducing policies, because they have, but there have been some. You're okay, Mama? You're okay. Okay, come here. You're okay. Sorry. There have been very prominent efforts at the congressional level of legislation introduced by Black women. So one big case is Representative Robin Kelly, who has introduced a piece of legislation several times, actually. And then we've also seen that also at the congressional level was the creation of the Black Maternal Health Caucus. So down the road, I'd really like to, you're better? So down the road, I'd like to look at those cases, but it's, again, further further down. But you're right, it's very much a prominent, it's very much a prominent case that unfortunately only seems to be growing.
Right. Okay. So audience, do you have any questions? I think those were my questions that I had for, you guys. So if you have any questions for each other, or if you want to add more to the study, because I know Dr. McNeely, you had other discussions that you didn't go through or go over. If you just want to talk about that, the same thing with Sydney, if there are no questions.
I had a quick question for Sydney, if I may. Sydney, so this project is really, really great, very timely, especially as we continue to see that even though they are no longer in the White House, Michelle Obama, former First Lady Michelle Obama, and now former First Lady Melania Trump continue to make headlines. Over the course of your, I guess, like as you progress through your research, would you consider adding other elements regarding how, for example, Michelle Obama was evaluated by the media? And so one case I'm thinking about was her healthy, I forget exactly what the program was called, but it was like the healthy eating program, right? And the movements. And as I was listening to your presentation, I was recalling a lot of the negative statements made about her in the context of her efforts to introduce a more healthy diet in public schools, right? I understand, like, for the sake of time, I know you're a grad student, so you're trying to finish, but I wasn't sure if maybe as you continue to pursue this topic, if you were considering adding other kind of elements or aspects to your study.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I think like even when I was reading through some of the segments and coding the segments, that did come up. So I think it was like the healthy, so it was like the initiative with like introducing healthy lunches into schools. And so there was a lot of negativity around that. A lot of the negative segments kind of concerned that. So I have thought about outside of looking at just tone, because this project that I presented just looks at tone. I am interested in sort of thinking about like, what is the nature of these segments? What exactly are they saying? What are they talking about? And so something like a topic model, right? Where I can sort of display, the topics that come across for Michelle Obama versus Melania Trump. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a really, really great point. I think it's important to sort of, I think tone, tells us a little bit, but it doesn't tell us the whole picture. So yeah, in the future, and even now presently thinking about like these other networks, I am thinking about other ways to sort of look at that data. Yeah.
And sorry, another question for you, if I may. I was also thinking about how, like, especially with like media, hold on, Mama, hold on. Especially with like media studies, which I only have a very brief knowledge of. I was thinking about when you were talking about like the Today Show versus MSNBC and Fox, which are very ideologically driven. But then I was thinking that maybe a show like the Today Show is more neutral in its presentation. So has that been explored as part of your study as well? You know what I mean, like the so like framing strategies of these networks, right? That again, on these ideologically driven, partisan driven channels versus like those shows or channels that are more neutral oriented, and maybe the impact of those elements.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like the Today Show, MSNBC, Fox, in this particular instance, I'm, interested in sort of more partisan networks, especially if we're thinking about emotion and tone. So I have looked at, I'm continuing to look at other networks like CBS, NBC, and ABC, but consistently finding that even for like the white woman political figures such as like Elizabeth Warren, it's very neutral. These networks are not really displaying any sort of definitive tone, positive or negative. A little bit, we don't really see it as much as we would see in like a Safe Fox or MSNBC. So I think the point here is to understand when there is sort of described emotion, or when there is a sort of explicit emotion, what is that emotion? How's it coming off? What is the tone like? So I think it's a little bit more difficult on these sort of like CBS and ABC, because they're sort of neutral to most people from what I've seen. They're pretty neutral overall. They say, oh, Michelle Obama did this today, Elizabeth Warren did this today, but not really, sort of attacking people's character. So we're thinking about networks that are more likely to do that, right? Like a Fox is more likely to do that. The interesting piece here is thinking about, when we do hold party ID constant and we look at, Elizabeth Warren on Fox versus Kamala Harris on Fox, right? Even in that instance, is Fox sort of harsher on Kamala Harris? And you might say, well, they're both Democrats, right? So what's the other major piece here? Is race. So yeah.
Yes, we have a question from Taylor. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Taylor Daly, a fourth-year political science student and an anthropology minor from the Florida A&M University. So my question is directed to you, Ms. Carr. In regards to your study, have you looked at the length and time former First Lady Michelle Obama and former First Lady Melania Trump, like, let's say, their events being held relevant in news media coverage? So whether, let's say, the event happened a week and 2 weeks later, news networks are still covering it. Do you think that plays into a part of that sets the tone for your study? Or like the relevance or lack of importance?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't, so the segments that I look at are just randomly extracted between 2013 and 2018. So I'm not able to tell specifically when, how soon after a major event. What I can say is, though, thinking about like the Michelle Obama segments, the ones that got coded in the negative range, a lot of them were centered around the program, the cafeteria lunch program, right? And so, you might suspect that, like, this recently happened and they're continuing to talk about it. That was a huge thing. There was also a commencement speech that she gave, I believe, at Tuskegee, that people didn't like, and that came up, right? So I think, to answer your point, when the segments are sort of getting coded, I am noticing that they're talking about, they're referring back to specific things time and time again. So I think that's definitely a really excellent point, and something I can think about a little bit more, whether, for the Black women, they sort of like drag on things. And what does that mean? Yeah, absolutely. Because when I'm coding segments myself, I'm looking like, wow, they really did not like, this healthy lunch program. Like, it's like they keep talking about it. It's like interesting. So yeah, I think that's a really great point.
Thank you, Taylor, for lifting that up. That was actually really interesting. So now something to think about as you're going on with the research, Sydney. Any other questions? Okay, because there was only the two of you guys, the two panelists, so we had a lot of time to discuss and talk. And I have no other questions. And if any, does anyone have any questions? You guys, you're welcome to stay and hang out with me, but I don't know if you like that. So we can call it a day, or we can just have a little party until like 20 minutes before they kick us out. So I don't know.
I guess that I have a question to you or to the audience. I'm still struggling to frame my project. So I guess any thoughts or any recommendations as to what would be an interesting frame, or I guess I could frame it this way: what type of frame would be interesting do you all think in the context of political science? And the reason why I ask that is this: a lot of the research we have about Black maternal mortality is in public health, but as I'm sure you all are aware, this is, whether it's framed as policy evaluation or just the impact on Black women, it is a political issue as well. But take it to the TV table. Okay, take it to the TV table now. Remember, you guys have to share. And so this is as well. Thank you. I guess that's where I'm a little bit stuck, which I feel like there's lots of different directions I can go in. I don't know which one would be the best or the most relevant, I guess. Thanks.
Does anyone want to start contributing? The way it is right now, Dr. McNeely, I see it as a policy evaluation. The way, just by looking at what you had on the PowerPoint presentation, and I guess the direction then would be, I guess that's why my question to you was, what do you see the policy direction of Mayor Bauer's office is going to be? So it's looking like policy evaluation. So you're looking at this from that lens. So I'm not sure, like that's how I see it, so, which is good because you are actually looking what can we do to make this better for this particular population. Don't know. So anyone else wants to add to that? Yeah, that's how I'm looking at it from the policy evaluation point of view. I mean, you could do both, public health and then policy evaluation, and then recommendations then can be very, very good because the recommendation can go either way from the health perspective and the policy perspective as well. So that's how I'm looking at it. I don't know if that's what you see in it, but that's what I see in it. Because like you can go to, it can go, like the recommendations will be really key because you have the policy side and then you have the health side of it as well.
Yes, I appreciate that. And then it was also suggested to me to kind of take a step back before delving into the evaluation and looking at how Mayor Bowser has been able to make progress. So the policy formation, right? So looking at, and I was gonna think about this more, looking at her as a policy entrepreneur, which I didn't get a chance to talk about that, but I don't know if she's intentionally aiming to be a policy entrepreneur, but that's how she's, in my evaluation of her, just looking at what's being released from her office, she's framing herself as a policy entrepreneur in the sense that, as I mentioned before, the DC Council has pursued various pieces of legislation, sometimes in collaboration with Mayor Bowser, but sometimes on their own. And then she will go and introduce a parallel policy, which appears on paper to have the same aim as what was introduced by the council, but then her office is focused more on the piece of legislation that she wants to pass or that she passed, if that makes sense. So it was suggested to me to also look at it from that perspective as well.
That's very, very good, actually. So you're right about the policy entrepreneur, because I don't know if that's what she is, but she seems to be very innovative in her policies.
Yes.
So you can put her in that category as a policy entrepreneur, but I'm not sure exactly how she came to be in office, whether that's how, that's how she started out, or she just became that because of the issues that she met there. And then she just decided to be very transformational, innovative, and then take chances with policies. And it's been working out for her. So I guess we could put her in that category, but yes, you do need to step back a little bit and see, did she become a policy entrepreneur on the job or she came in as a policy entrepreneur. And then it's become easier to say, okay, so she had these ideas coming in of transforming policies and making it work, which will then help with the research, because then you can say, well, okay, she actually is delivering on her policy promises to DC. If she made policy promises, yes.
Thanks. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I really enjoyed listening to all of the research. I'm kind of curious to see where these research are headed, like Sydney's research after hearing the research is timely, it's needed, and how women of color are portrayed in the media, especially powerful women in power, how they're being portrayed, as opposed to their counterpart in the same position, how they're being portrayed in the media. It's really interesting, and I'll be interested to see where this leads, and also what you actually get out of it. I know you want to do the dissertation part of it, which is really important, get it done. And then you have the freedom to play with the data that you've collected and do other things with the data, and include different variables to see where the story becomes at the end of the day. And same thing with Dr. McNeely research as well. So two sides, right? So you have the public health, and then you have the public policy side of it. And then the leadership side of it as well, you know? And so three different pieces that you have going for you in that research. So, I mean, I'm interested to see where this ends. I don't have anything else to add. And of course, I'm not political science, I'm public administration. So I guess it's easier for me to see these things because I'm not looking at it from the lens of political science. Any questions before we call it a day? All right, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed the session, and I'm gonna stick around for a little bit. If you want to hang out again, you're more than welcome to. If not, thanks for joining us. There are so many other panels going on. You're more than welcome to join. Thank you. Yeah, bye.